Hello and welcome to the Winners Never Quit podcast, all about mental resilience, embracing hardship, learning from it, all to build a winner's mindset. Hosted by myself, Jack Jarvis, and if you could like, follow, subscribe to the podcast, I would really appreciate it. Today I'm joined by Jamie Hull. Now Jamie is an ex-soldier whose life was completely changed when in 2007 he survived a plane crash, almost costing him his life, and doctors only gave him a 5% chance of surviving. Through grit, determination, and mental fortitude, he recovered, and since then has become a leading PADI scuba instructor, mountain leader, motivational speaker, and he has just released a book called Life on a Thread, and he joins me now. Jamie, welcome. It's great to have you on the podcast, mate.
And you, Jack. Great to be here, mate.
Thank you very much. We start every podcast the same. So, Jamie, what defines winning in your life?
For me, winning, I mean, you could bring up examples of, great sportsmen. I was tuned into a bit of Wimbledon recently and, watching the likes of Djokovic go through, probably unsurprisingly, because he's just a legend with a racket. And of course, you've got great sportsmen out there, winners, time and time again. They kind of prove that in testimony. But for me, there's a lot of winners out there. And I kind of see it every day. I'm based here in London, so I'm cutting around London, doing what I'm doing, going about my business. And I thought about this question, and, you see people and you see, average Joe, so to speak, but you also see people that are up against it. People that are clearly living with challenges. Just this morning, I saw a young woman in a wheelchair with an assistant, with her, somebody with her, could have been a friend, family member. And she was on a mobile phone making a call. And in my mind, that individual is a winner because clearly they've got challenges greater than the norm, greater than, say, Joe average, as it were. And they're doing what they're doing. I mean, I know a guy that, a good friend of mine that just did Race Across America. And he's paraplegic, so he's in a wheelchair. A gentleman called Luke Delahunty. I've known him for a few years, and I marvel at that. The fact that so he followed in my footsteps. I did Race Across America with Help Heroes about 10 years ago now. Relatively able-bodied, as I am, as one of the 4 upright riders. We had 4 hand cyclists. But then this gentleman, Luke, as I mentioned, he's paraplegic, and he's one of the newer team members to do Race Across America with the charity Blesma. So I find that extraordinary, and it's, in my view, simply put, the winners are those that perhaps have greater challenges, needs, requirements, but they're still willing to stay in the fight of life, so to speak, and to keep pushing to achieve their goals, dreams, aspirations. So irrespective of what you might be up against as an individual, that's my take on it. And I've learnt that obviously firsthand, as you're well aware. I've had a major burns injury back in the day, albeit sort of 15 summers ago now. And I had no choice. I was compelled to fight through and to kind of come good on the other side, as it were, and make the best of my new life and sort of crack on again. And again, there's many others out there that are up against it, challenges, and with challenges, and they have to fight through every day, and they have to sort of pull it out of the bag, so to speak, to kind of make progress in life. And of course, that's what it's all about.
You look at certain people, you look about the small wins in their life, and I always say to sometimes my recruits, you may have heard it, the Navy SEAL, make your bed in the morning, that's your first small win. There's loads of different wins, loads of different winners.
Always make my bed, mate.
Yeah, no, 100%. I love that speech. I really agree with that. And just, I want to touch on something you mentioned there. Now, I get asked, why didn't I quit, during the row? Well, quitting for me wasn't an option. When I was in the middle of the Atlantic, I couldn't go anywhere. There was no rescue. And you said you had no option, after your accident to recover. But was there something else? What made you lay in your hospital bed and think, right, I'm not going to be, this isn't me, there's more to me, I'm not out here, I'm going to fight back?
It's a good question. I mean, it's probably worth emphasising that I actually did lay in that hospital bed for a full 2 years. So initially 6 months, drug-induced in Florida with the medics. They put me under. It's a long time. and then followed by 18 months in various burns units, bridging on from the US in Florida to, I was in Stoke Mandeville, in Aylesbury, Chelmsford, down in East Grinstead in Surrey. So all these different burns units for a total period of 2 years of my life, laid up in that hospital bed. And I've not hidden this in sort of previous, narratives that I've shared regarding my story. There was about an 18-month period, shall we say, post-incident for me. So post the flying incident when I received the major burns injury. And for those 18 months, quite, if you like, oddly, I was fighting. I was doing pretty well. I was in the fight, so to speak, for the first 18 months. But then after 18 months, I got to a point where, if you can understand, and I think this is really important for people to listen and to understand this, that after 18 months, I was tired of being in the fight. I became so tired. So I've used this analogy before, and I felt like a boxer in the ring, but I wasn't on round 12, taking the punches, getting bashed around. I felt like I was on round 4,136 or something like that. And I was just so sick and tired, literally, frankly, of being in the fight. I didn't want to do it anymore. And to that end, I actually started a process of considering, a reliable method to sort of check out. Now, there wasn't many options that weren't messy, but I did consider the sort of cleaner option of Dignitas in Switzerland, because why? And this isn't a sob story, it's not why I share it. It's simply because my body was in such a desperate condition. Physically, I was struggling to heal. I was 18 months down the road from the injury, from the burns. I had massive total body surface area, open wounds still on large areas of my skin's surface, if you understand. And I'm so sick and tired of being in that struggle, being in that fight. Didn't think I could do it anymore. And so I was losing the spirit, what I call the mojo. And I was losing that spirit, and I was ready to throw the towel in. Anyway, long story short, fortunately, I got some assistance with a gentleman that effectively found me and approached me through the church. So somebody who knew somebody contacted this gentleman. He came to my support aid, if you will, and he just started having conversations with me. It was a gentleman from deepest Africa. Believe he was from Zimbabwe, and we were having lots of candid, open, real man-to-man conversations, me and this African guy. And he used to come back and forward. He used to come and visit me pretty much once a week. And don't get me wrong, it wasn't an overnight turning process in my mind, but this gentleman persuaded me to fight for about 1 month longer. Otherwise, he did say, look, I'll help you, I'll hold your hand, and I'll take you where you need to go, where you want to go. And frankly, that was Switzerland, I make no bones about hiding that. But I'm grateful that, if you like, a stranger, because that's what he was for all intents and purposes, came to my assistance. And as a man to man, we just talked. And so sometimes it's good to really share thoughts, feelings, the deeper sentiments between men, and to share the deeper elements of that, and to explore that, and perhaps what he did was essentially give me a small seed of hope, which I was able to then feed off. We weren't even friends. We were just two men, just almost strangers, But we spoke regularly once a week, and that's kind of how it started. And he gave me this ultimatum, simply put. He just said, look, if you hold on for me for 1 calendar month, just keep up the fight, keep up this pretense. I know you're in a war. Keep going, just 1 calendar month, that's all I ask. And if you still feel the same in 1 month, then you know where I am, and I will help you. And so it was a bit of a bittersweet ultimatum, if you will, at the time, but I agreed to sort of step up to that offer from a fellow man, as it were, and then slowly but surely I started to tentatively, almost reluctantly, sort of keep going, but turn that corner eventually. And it was turning that corner that again gave me the hope. So if you like, Jamie Hull version 2.0, the new me, in the new body, in the new skin, and with that tiny seed of hope, I was able to almost nurture that, to grow that, if you like. It was almost like adding water to the plant. And I was the new me, kind of slowly growing me over time. And I say about growth because it's the only way, and I've thought about this, it's the only way that we as human beings make progress. We all have to grow, if you like, and develop growth in ourselves to achieve and to kind of to move forward in life. And it's all about the progress. So I learnt that from, if you like, from sort of ground level, from roots level, coming through a massive life-changing burns injury. And nobody can argue that point with me. Nobody. That's the one thing I'm definitely qualified to give in testimony, because I was rock bottom. I mean, I came back somehow miraculously with huge medical help and my own grit and determination from 63% third and fourth degree burns, internal injuries, some facial fractures from a secondary impact, having jumped, and to fight back from that, if you like, that intensity, that wrath of physical injury was off the charts, quite frankly. So it's the one thing I do feel that I'm very much able to share with other fellow people out there, if they care to listen, that is, in that, I had to do it from pretty much ground zero, from roots level, and to rebuild myself. I mean, I had to learn to feed. I had to learn to write my name all over again, to walk all over again with the help of a couple of scrapping physiotherapist gentlemen at the hospital. I remember that. And it's all about, that having that seed of hope, developing that mojo, that human spirit, that mindset, and then to this grow from there. It's a slow process sometimes, but to reboot almost, with the new version. I say that because it's almost like an analogy on sort of new software. We're always updating our phones, iPads, laptops, all the rest of it. That was how it was for me. I had to reboot. But I had to have the hope inside of me, inside here, in the grey matter, in the mind, to be able to do that. And again, my take on this is that, simply put, with hope, with human spirit, we can go on and we can grow our lives, we can progress, and we can achieve remarkable things. I mean, look at you. Look at your testimony there, just rowing across the Atlantic. We spoke about that very briefly before we kicked off today. And for any individual to do that on their own, without support, is an incredible feat of endurance. So yeah, you should be very proud of yourself, mate.
No, thank you very much, Jamie. And it's funny you should say it, because I look at people like yourself and people like you, and they give me motivation. And I don't know if you've ever come across him, Lee Spencer. So he's ex-Royal Marine. He rode from mainland Europe to South America, but he's got one leg. So when I was having bad days, I used to think, God, he can do it with one leg. Surely I can do it.
Yeah, remarkable individual, yeah.
And just what you touched on there, and when we talk about your willpower, the will to survive, Bear Grylls touches on it. And not only did you survive the plane crash, but you also jumped out of the plane to survive. And, I love that. And that's why you suffered so many fractures. One thing I wanted to touch on, what you mentioned, he gave you this ultimatum. He said, give me one more month. Jamie, did you see it as a challenge? Because I know obviously your background, in the military, you then wanted to learn how to be a pilot, so there's another challenge. Did you see it as a challenge, or?
In all sincerity, at that stage of the game, I genuinely did not want to be in the fight any longer. And I'm not joking, but if that gentleman, that African gentleman that I mentioned, his name was Pastor Billy, and if he'd have, at that moment in time, said, okay, yeah, I get it, mate, I get it, I want to help you, and therefore I'm going to take you by the hand, as it were, and I'm going to help you, I'm going to put you in my car, I'm going to drive you all the way where you need to be in sort of sunny Switzerland. And trust me, I would have done it. That's where I was mentally. I would have quite happily taken that vial of superbarbiturate from the medical, personnel there, and literally down the hatch. I would not have hesitated, because that's where I was mentally. So in a nutshell, I was enthusiastic about the prospect of assisted suicide. And obviously when I reflect now, all these years on, that's pretty messed up, because I would not want to be there now. I wouldn't want to be that person in that mindset, in that frame of mind. So I feel blessed, for want of a better word, that, if you like, I had that individual come to me and give me that ultimatum that I've described. I fought through. I didn't necessarily see it as a challenge, but because I didn't want to fight, remember?
Yeah, yeah.
But I think that something happened. Like, so about a week later, I remember, for the record, I had an Indian gentleman. He was my surgeon at the time, a gentleman called Mr. Ghosh. And that chap came in. And normally, the nurses would take down my dressings, and they would be sort of like pale-faced, looking a bit sort of ashen, a bit dejected. Then Mr. Ghosh would walk in the aftermath and sort of shaking his head, scratching his grey beard. I remember that much. Looking pretty, sort of demotivated, if you will, when he saw the condition of my wounds on my back, shoulder, scalp. I was in a bad way. I need to emphasise that. And remember, this was 18 months on, thereabouts. And but this was about a week after the Pastor Billy sort of ultimatum, remember?
Yeah.
And the nurses, we went for a surgery. We did the surgery. We came back. And then, let's say 4 or 5 days later, the nurses, in typical fashion, had to take down the dressings on my back, shoulder, my scalp, to observe, to investigate, and to look at the condition of the wounds. And to their astonishment, there was starting to develop some improvement, some closure on the wounds. They weren't as big, they weren't as dramatic, they weren't as angry looking, they weren't perhaps as infected looking. And Mr. Ghosh came in. He followed up, as he always did, the consultant, and for the first time in a long time, he looked a bit chipper, and he looked a bit more animated, and he said, "I think that we are starting to get somewhere." And you know what? I mean, that was kind of that was kind of feeding me that little sort of essence of hope. And I think that's all I needed. I needed to get a handle on something, because I was in such a desperate place for such a long time. And trust me, if probably that scenario had not have played out in the way that I've just described, I probably undoubtedly would have been making that call to Pastor Billy and said, "Mate, you need to be here. You need to help me, and we need to go." And I just feel entirely fortunate that it didn't play out in that fashion, and that I was able to fight through with the seed of hope, with that mojo, that human spirit, and just keep pushing, and eventually heal, because that's all I needed to do. I needed to heal. Once I healed, in a nutshell, I could develop the new version of me from there.
Yeah.
It was never going to be the same, because for all intents and purposes, I wasn't that same kind of athletic version, say 1.0 Jamie. Now I was scarred, significantly scarred. I had even sustained some nerve damage in my lower limb, both legs, from loss of muscle, loss of nerve. So that had rendered me with what they call a bilateral sort of nerve damage there. And unfortunately, I was never going to be the same athlete. So, for example, I was never going to be a runner. And that was a bitter pill for me to swallow.
That'd be a bitter pill for me to swallow.
Yeah, because I loved running. I mean, I used to be a guy that, would smash out, my best time for like the basic fitness test in the British Army was back in the day was 7:28.
Yeah, very quick. So
yeah, and 4 miles in 21 minutes flat, so 5:15 a mile I would average. So I lost all of that, you know.
What Jamie's referring to there, so it's actually changed just recently, but we used to do a mile and a half. So a mile and a half in 7:28, 28 is very quick, mate. Very quick indeed. So what was the final total number of surgeries that you had?
So to date, I've genuinely had 63 surgeries under general anaesthetic, which means they put me to sleep 63 times, which is ironic because I was indeed 63% third and fourth degree burns of my total body surface area.
Wow, that is, I don't know if incredible is the right word, but just to go through that many surgeries, I mean, I've been through, I think, one under general anaesthetic, and that was tough.
Yeah, it's not for the faint-hearted. That's all I'm going to say.
Yeah.
It's a long and tough journey. Is large third-degree burns.
As well, you've battled back, you've recovered, and you wanted to get back into your scuba diving, but you were worried. How did you overcome that fear, and what led you to getting back in the water?
It's a great question. So I was a diver from old, and I'd been a diver actually since a young man, a young backpacker. Sorry, when I was working, volunteering in Australia, and I was working up in Cairns. As a lot of people will know, that's the gateway to the Great Barrier Reef in Australia, one of the biggest barrier reefs or reef systems on the planet. And I did this voluntary work, long story short, I became a PADI dive master, which is a kind of supervisory grade. So I was qualified to assist instructors and to guide certified divers on the reef. And I effectively worked for some big companies out there, including ProDive and some private entrepreneurs with their own yachts and stuff like that. And I'm like 19, 20 years of age, so I was living the dream. So that's where the hook was at a young age, and I got into my diving. Fast forward a few short years, by 21 I think it was, I became a PADI instructor. So I did my training in Egypt and my sort of instructor examinations out there as well with PADI. Loved it. I worked in Egypt, I worked briefly in Jamaica, I worked in the Philippines, managed a big diving sort of conservation project in the deepest South China Sea. And for diving, for me, was always an amazing passion. It was a great passion. But when I got burned in 2007, I honestly did not believe that I'd ever get back in the water again, because obviously I'd had major skin grafts. I mean, you fear that the salt water is going to be destructive to the skin grafts and perhaps wear them away because of the salinity. That high salt concentration in the ocean. You think it's just going to be damaging. So that was a big fear for me. And actually, truth is, I never went back in the water for 5 years post-injury. So around about 2012, I got a call from a former employer in the dive industry, and this woman called me up and said, "Look, myself and husband have heard about your, what's happened, and obviously you used to work for us. This was Emperor Divers in Egypt, and would you be interested to come out diving again?" I said, "Look, I don't know if I can. I'm just fearful that obviously skin grafts, yada yada. I just don't. I think it's probably not worth going there." And she said, "Well, it's up to you. But if you ever want to dive, it's kind of open ticket as far as we're concerned. Just get a flight out here, and we'll put you on a liverboard, which is basically a floating dive platform that kind of travels around the sea. In this case, the Red Sea in Egypt." And they offered me that trip, and I sat on it for about a year. So and I genuinely didn't go in the water for 5 years. But when I eventually did, I need not have been concerned or worried, because actually I found that the ocean effectively became my friend, because actually there is a very, if you like, a mineral balance in the ocean that is actually closely aligned with our skin's own pH balance. Okay, so it's like the acid-alkali sort of balance in our skin naturally with the ocean. So it's aligned. So in other words, the mineral content within the skin assists our skin, and as many people will know, it can assist to a degree with healing. Like if you've ever had a small wound and you sort of bathe it in the ocean, it can help. So I'm great testimony to that. I mean, there I was recovering from burns. I mean, I think when I went back out to Egypt, I was pretty much healed, but very vulnerable. So it was easy for me to cut and scrape and, damage the skin, so to speak. But so I was there petrified, thinking first giant stride back into the ocean off the back of the dive boat. I was going to come out and perhaps skin grafts were going to be hanging off once I peeled the wetsuit back off again, back on dry. So I needn't have worried, because in essence the body became somewhat, if you like, it promoted the skin's condition like 1 week later when I'd been diving day in, day out. And that was it for me. Once I realised that actually the ocean assisted me once again, and it in part helped me to heal and improve the quality, the integrity, the strength of my skin with the healing ongoing, that was it. I was hooked all over again. And I figured, okay, I'm going to carry on diving. And then I decided it wasn't just about me, that other people could benefit from this. So I started co-managing, if you will, a lot of dive expeds for the charity Help for Heroes. And I realised there was some great merits and benefits in scuba diving for people with injuries, veterans and so on. So I then climbed the ladder with Paddy, and I just went a lot further, and I ended up becoming, I went all the way to becoming a master instructor, and then I took the big leap, which is a big leap, to becoming a Paddy course director, and that was just a few short years ago now. I did my training out in Thailand, so I kind of, in order to make that leap, I was going back and forward to Thailand a lot, and I probably did a solid 6 months of development out there professionally, indeed to become a leading instructor with Paddy. So that was a big goal, and it was a big transformation, and it helped me on my own journey to not only believe in myself, but to kind of realise the power of the ocean in terms of healing and development for others. And just briefly, I'll give you a quick example. So I've worked with many wounded, many injured, lots of veterans, and more recently I took a very wounded gentleman from that was injured in Afghanistan, a chap called Ben Parkinson, MBE, who lives in Doncaster with his parents. And between us as a big team, if you will, we all went out to Bahamas, beautiful location in the Caribbean, and I was able to take Ben under my wing with some assistance with a couple of other divers out there in the Bahamas for support. But I got Ben in the water. We did 19 dives, and we had an amazing time. And this gentleman, just for the record, also for your kind of listeners, Ben had a traumatic brain injury and no legs, so he lost both legs above the knee from an IED explosion in Afghanistan. So for him to be able to dive, and for him to be able to get that kind of oceanic sort of healing experience from the Bahamas, from the ocean, I think is a very powerful thing. And yeah, I'm a huge advocate for the power of the ocean for, if you like, human sort of healing and development, and that's a big part of what I'm all about.
Just to hear, and you see your face light up when you talk about, helping others, is that something that has really helped your recovery? You talk about all these things, but to see other people when you take them underwater, is that something that's helped you and helped you process and what happened to you and keep growing, like you touched on at the start of the pod?
Yeah, I mean, it's not just diving. I mean, you don't just have to take diving as an example, but I use diving in my own testimony, if you will, post large third-degree burns, because I do believe it is an extraordinary activity, because you are completely submerged in the depths of the ocean. Therefore, your body, your skin surface is in contact. All of your skin surface is in contact with the ocean. And remember what I said, the mineral elements of the ocean. And that is, again, from my own experience and testimony, that is hugely healing. So if people aren't sure about that, it can help with so much. And you don't actually have to be a Superman or Superwoman to go scuba diving. It's actually quite a slow, methodical activity, as long as you play by the rules. There are rules concerning, depth and the time that you can kind of breathe on the gas and so on and so forth. And as long as you play by the rules, it's very doable. I mean, I've taught even people with the most tricky disabilities, like I mentioned, Ben. I've taught a gentleman that was fully blind. I've worked with a lot of elderly as well, believe it or not, people that are perhaps senior than 60, 70 plus years of age. I think there was one gentleman that I took that was in his mid to late 80s as well, for a couple of try dives. So it's very accessible, that's what I'm saying. Once you're in the water kind of buoys you up and it kind of supports you. And as long as you pace yourself down there and you've got a decent instructor, or at the very least sort of a qualified sort of dive master to kind of look after you, it's very achievable. Again, I will say it's not just diving. I mean, I have a passion for other environments.
Yeah, you're a mountain leader. Tell us about that.
Yeah, so I'll give you an example. So I am a certified ML, and I got to work in the mountains with lots of different teams, from schools to private teams, adults of various kind of teams and groups, and the thing about the mountains for me is different from the ocean, I guess, because now you're on land. But I find the mountains very therapeutic. And I'll give you an example. So last week, I've literally just got back. I did a bit of work just in support of the Curtis Palmer program, which is a fantastic program. They support blue light service personnel, so sort of police, fire, and indeed sort of ambulance personnel that might be struggling with mental health or indeed physical injury. So we even had some individuals on the trip recently to Norway. Had some terminal illness diagnosed, whether it was cancer or whether it was a motor neurons disease. One gentleman, and it's fascinating to witness, if you like, the development in them. I use that word quite a lot, but the mountains can be great therapy, and it can be again a great source of development for individuals that embrace the mountain, want to get into the mountain. And you don't have to be a Superman or a Superwoman. You just have to get into the mountain, make sure you've got a small pack with the essentials, sun cream, hats, rain gear, a warm jacket in case the weather closes in and you start getting a bit cold up there, perhaps a warm hat, bit of food, bit of water to keep you going, some snacks to keep the morale up. So you don't need much. Obviously a map and compass is vital up there, and perhaps a head torch in case you get caught out. But again, you don't need much, but it can be very therapeutic. You can learn a lot about yourself. You can pace yourself in the mountain. You can go as slow or as fast as you want to go. But in my humble experience, the mountains work very well to promote growth and to promote development in sort of fellow man. And I find that a wonderful environment. And that as a testimony last week. So we took, I was just part of the team. So I didn't lead this, but I was just there for support. And I witnessed lots of individuals, men and women, with some either mental health or physical injuries, really helping to find themselves in that environment, to perhaps come to terms with what was going on, and to give them that little bit of growth, that little bit of development. And it was a wonderful thing. It was a wonderful environment. We had some fun. We had some banter. We used the environment again for if you like, therapy, for that backdrop. And then we did about 3 days walking, and then we went down to the fjord level, which is sea level, the Norwegian fjords. Then we got in these two-man, you might have seen them, they're green plastic two-man Indian canoes. So we had one man in front, one man in the back, and we had all the gear, in dry bags piled up in the middle. We'd clip it in with the carabiners for safety. And these kayaks, just for safety, they've got like one of these inflatable sponson things inside at the front. So at the bow section, one at the rear, in case it does turn. But touch wood, I will say that we didn't have any capsize because the Norwegian fjords were very stable. And we actually did 4 days in the kayak, sort of gently paddling, it were, to get from A to B, to get to these different campsites. And we were self-sufficient. So we carried a bit of gas, we carried the burners, we carried the sort of, military-style sort of ration packs, either boil in the bag in the hot water in the pan, or we just boil the water up, add it to the dehydrated ration packs to sort of, so we've got meals that we can sustain ourselves with. And we were hugely self-sufficient. You can take water from the fjord and drink. So it was a perfect environment,
Yeah.
Can you imagine that? 3 days in the mountain, walking, 4 days gently kayaking with those Indian canoes. And by the end of it, don't get me wrong, we were beat up, we were knackered, but we'd had a great expedition. And there's a lot of growth in that, a lot of development, and a lot of feel-good factor when we finally got back to the airport in Kristiansand to make the flight back up to Oslo, the capital, and then take the final hop back to London Heathrow.
I totally agree, and I think now, because you're so used to that instant gratification, that when you take all that materialistic stuff and you have to go out and you have to earn it, or, when you're sort of away from all of that, it's so much more satisfying personally, and that achievement's always with you. I feel like if you go and walk up a mountain, or like you said, you're self-sufficient for 4 days off the grid, I find that so much more fulfilling, and I just wish more people would be, up for sort of trying it. I don't know about you, but when you're out there and you're alone, you certainly reflect. You learn a lot about yourself, more than you do sat on your phone, flicking through Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter. So, I want to talk about the book, Life on a Thread. When did you write it, and what made you want to tell your story?
So the book was written about a couple of years ago now. I actually sat on the fence for probably 10 years, meaning I wanted to write a book, and but I was just, I don't know, I was just reluctant. I had so much going on with my own fight. Remember, 7 years of surgery, sort of in earnest, chasing surgeons and trying to get everything done on the National Health Service. It just took time to get where I needed to be with the healing and with the development, with surgery, etc. But I was doing a lot of public speaking, and I was an ambassador for Help Heroes, going out and doing talks in the city and so on and so forth. A lot of people were, in a friendly sense, encouraging me and saying, "Oh, have you ever thought about writing a book?" And again, I had thought about it, but I was sitting on the fence, almost reluctant. But over the course of time, I guess all of that encouragement from a lot of people started to kind of resonate in my ears. And I thought, well, so many people encouraging me, perhaps that's a sign. So I just decided to not just sort of talk the talk about it, but effectively walk the walk. And I teamed up with a ghostwriter, and then fortunately I was very lucky. That was a long process. That was a couple of years process in itself. And then fortunately I got a good literary agent in London, and then I got picked up with Penguin, or Penguin Random House. So I was delighted, and it's a bit of a comeback kid story, because in essence the book touches on my former years when I was a kid. And I mean, my upbringing was a little bit, it was a bit tricky in places. It was a bit difficult, and I could have probably quite easily stumbled down a more negative pathway, and perhaps, I probably could have ended up in prison or something if I wasn't careful. So there's a lot in that story that is quite enlightening. It's quite entertaining, and what is interesting, I guess, is the two-part comeback kid nature of the story. So part one, if you will, touches on the early years and how I was able to turn that around and make that comeback. And part two, if you like, was kind of getting shot down, as it were, sort of metaphorically, in flames, massive burns injury, sort of unexpectedly piloting an aircraft in Florida, 2007. And then the ultimate comeback, if you will, from that element of my sort of human survival story. And then I guess it goes on. It sort of it plays out with the elements of how I was able to really spin it around and make good of the kind of new version of my life. So I would hope that the book, certainly from the testimonies online, and I've sold many thousands of copies now. And I've been very fortunate. It's gone around the world, and from the feedback that I'm getting, a lot of people are sort of feeling inspired about that. Now, I use that word, if you like, gently. I don't like to use that word a hell of a lot, but genuinely from the testimony, a lot of people are taking some strong feel-good factor from the story. It's helping them. That's the kind of if you like, the essence of what I'm picking up on. So, which is perfect, because that's exactly why I wanted to write the story, Life on a Thread. In essence, I gave it that title because it depicts and explains how I felt, the sheer vulnerability of what I felt and what I experienced in the immediate aftermath of the injury and the burns, because I genuinely didn't think I was going to be able to make it, and I didn't think I was going to be able to hold on.
Jamie, neither did the doctors, mate. You know what I mean? 5%. So
yeah. So like I've mentioned, in essence, Life on a Thread, I'm finding is helping people. It is inspiring people, and that is great. That is precisely why I wanted to write the book and get the story out there in the wider sense. So I'm very grateful that that people are taking something from that, and obviously the word of mouth.
Yeah, Jamie, you certainly inspired me, and I'm not just saying that because you're here, but why do you use that word carefully? Because what makes you feel that way about that word?
Well, I think for me, it gets used an awful lot, and I hear it an awful lot, and it almost, because you hear it so much in society in sort of modern day language, it's almost, it almost sort of
Plays down the value.
Yeah, it plays it down, or perhaps undermines the true, like you say, the value of what it actually means to be inspired. But I don't just think it's me that inspires, or yourself, rowing across the Atlantic. I think there's an awful lot of people out there that have the ability to inspire. I don't think you have to do some epic event to inspire others, or come through some heinous, life-changing injury or something like that to necessarily inspire others. And I see it every day. You can do good in the world, and the guy out on the street, trust me, that's out there. I mean, we're at the Union Jack Club now, and I guarantee you, there's a guy out there with his dust cart, and he's got a litter picker in hand and a high-vis jacket, and he's picking up litter. And for me, that's a guy that inspires the community, right? Because otherwise, if it wasn't for him, that shit's going to be strewn all over the streets out there in Waterloo, sort of central London, outside Union Jack Club, outside the station, and it's not going to be as it's not going to look as sightly, and it's not going to look as good for the tourists and the passers-by. So there's a million things people do out there every day that effectively, can inspire people, the community, others. Perhaps you could argue that extraordinary events can have a greater weight behind them, and that can perhaps catch people's attention. But yeah, there's a lot of good people in the world, and I think we shouldn't lose sight of that. Sort of every day, just going about everyday business.
Jamie, I always used to think, people say, talk about a row, and I'd go, you're this, you're that, and I think people I really, some of my best friends, are nurses, and I always say they do a tough, really tough job, and carers for, not much financial gain. They just do it out of the good of their hearts, and it's exactly like you said, the street cleaner, I find inspiration from them. Jamie, I just want to finish on, right, having spoke about, inspirations and things like that. If there is any advice, knowing what you know now, having been through what you've been through, that you would give to a younger Jamie, what would it be for tackling life?
Simply put, never lose heart. Always believe that that your goals and your kind of your achievements, if you will, and what it is that you're trying to gain in life can be achieved. But you've got to understand that some things take more effort than others, and sometimes you've got to stay in the fight. But if you can hold on to that will and that desire and that mojo, that human spirit that I already mentioned earlier on, then that's what it's all about. And ultimately, with great will and determination, all of us can achieve miraculous and outstanding, kind of things in life. And you can surprise yourself. You really can. You have to stay hungry for the process, and you have to want something. You can get there.
No, Jamie, that's a great way to finish the podcast. Thank you so much for coming on, my friend. I really appreciate it.
Cheers, buddy.
Guys, if you enjoyed that, please comment, like, subscribe, follow, all that good stuff. And I'll see you next week for another episode of the Winners Never Quit podcast. Thank you very much.